So now we're going to move into GMOs, genetically modified organisms. GMOs are created by taking a gene from one organism and inserting it into another organism. So we have some laboratory working on here. We've modified organisms by crossbreeding and by pollination, but this is actually going into the laboratory to make those genetic changes. What are the benefits of genetic engineering? Well, we have increased crop yield and quality. We can create pest-resistant strains, drought-resistant strains, salt-resistant strains, and increase essential nutrients. There's one that they're working on inserting vitamin A into rice plants. It's called golden rice. We've also started working on some genetically modified animals, such as salmon, that would allow them to grow twice as big, twice as fast. But these have not been approved yet. Benefits: it can cause potential changes in pesticide use, reduce the need for pesticides. Corn is susceptible to the bollworm, the European corn borer, the butterfly moth larvae. So we insert the gene Bt, which produces natural insecticides on leaves. We can also produce things that are Roundup ready, meaning it allows Roundup to not harm the targeted organism, but we can go ahead and spray and it can kill the organisms around it. And it allows for increased profits. Concerns about genetically modified organisms? Well, there's many. The first one is safety for human consumption. Is it harmful to humans? We don't really know. Are there going to be allergies to foods with genes from another food? If you're allergic to peanuts and there's a genetically modified organism that has peanuts in it, would you be allergic? As of 2009, 63% of corn, 91% of soybeans, and 71% of cotton was of the genetically modified form. The second one is the effects on biodiversity. If regular plants are able to breed with wild and GMOs interacting, the natural varieties are going to be eliminated. We're going to have this loss of genetic diversity in the food crops, and we don't know what beneficial traits are going to be lost when that happens. And the third one is going to be this regulation of genetically modified organisms. There are no regulations in the United States that mandates labeling. The thought is that if they mandate labeling of genetically modified organisms, people would assume that they're mandating it because they're bad. And, money is king, and we want to not make sure that happens. The only way that you can ensure that you're not buying genetically modified organisms at this point is to buy organic, because genetically modified organisms are not allowed to be included under the organic label. If you take a look at the world and who requires labeling of GMOs, 50 countries, including most of the European Union and most of Asia, require labeling of genetically engineered foods, whereas the United States and Canada do not require labeling. And if you want to be an informed consumer, if you want to buy organic produce, most times things are labeled, but if you want to understand how those codes work in the grocery store, the 5-digit code that begins with a 9 means that the produce is organic. If it's just a regular 4-digit code, that's just the conventional code. And you notice that if you're looking, if you had the same type of apple here, so Granny Smith apple would be 4139, and organic one would be 94139, so that number is repeated. And then if it's a GMO, that means it starts with an 8. We don't have this labeling here in the United States. We only have the 4-digit code or starting with a 9. Go to the grocery store, you can start to notice these things. Looking at farming practices. So we have this conventional agriculture, industrial agriculture, where labor is reduced, machinery is used. We call this industrial agriculture. Traditional farming, it's still used in the developing world where human labor is used and not machinery. But we're moving into this shifting agriculture. So shifting agriculture involves nutrient-poor soils, typically in the rainforests of Central and South America. So you clear that land, and it has enough nutrients to use it for a few years, and then once the soil is depleted of nutrients, we can sort of slash and burn, or we move on to another area because there's no nutrients in that area. Nomadic grazing is where you take herds and you move them over long distances to seasonally productive ground. So you say, okay, we have things producing here, we're going to move over here where this is growing, we'll move over here. Desertification is when the soil is degraded by agriculture to the point at which it's no longer productive. So we've talked about this when we've talked about water and when we've talked about soil. Sustainable agriculture fulfills the need for food and fiber while enhancing the quality of the soil, minimizing the use of non-renewable resources, and allowing economic viability for the farmer. The practices that allow this are intercropping, 2 or more crops in the same field. We have things like crop rotation, which if we rotate crops, we allow nitrogen to be restored, or different nutrients are pulled from that same soil because different crops have different nutritional needs. We have agroforestry, which allows vegetation of different heights, which helps reduce erosion. It might also draw in birds, which can help eliminate pests. And then contour plowing. Plowing parallel to the topography helps prevent erosion, helps prevent water and soil from being run away. No-till agriculture helps to stop soil degradation by leaving the crop residues in the field and not tilling the land after each harvest. So you can see that this is all still here. What's the detriment here? A solution that leaves the crop roots to hold the soil in place. So it helps hold that soil in place, but then you also have to keep in mind that you have to plant sort of that every other row, and we're not tilling that soil back under, so we might have to use more pesticides in the long run. Integrated pest management, IPM, uses a variety of techniques designed to minimize pesticide inputs. There's 5 techniques associated with IPM. So we have crop rotation, intercropping, so crop rotation, rotating the crops like we just spoke about, intercropping, like we also just spoke about where we have alternating crops, planting pesticide-resistant crop varieties, creating habitats for predators. If we encourage our predators to stay, then they're going to help reduce our pests. And then the limited use of pesticides. In order to limit our use of pesticides, the farmer has to do careful inspection or observation of the plants to decide whether or not and how much pesticides to apply. This allows us to have less pesticides, but it also causes the farmer to have to spend more time in the field observing and might pick up on other potential problems, such as needing to apply more water or more of other nutrients. And so overall, there's a better yield of produce because the farmer's paying closer attention to his crops. Organic agriculture is the production of crops without the use of synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. And 5 principles that go along with that is to use ecological principles and work with natural systems rather than dominating them. To keep as much organic matter and as many nutrients in the soil and on farms as possible. To avoid the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. To maintain the soil by increasing soil mass, biological activity, and beneficial chemical properties. And to reduce the adverse environmental effects of agriculture. It's very costly. The OFPA, Organic Foods Production Act, was passed in 1990, and that was where we defined some uniform national standards for what we can call an organic food. If we move on to high-density animal farming, we have this idea of CAFO, Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations. They're feedlots. They're large indoor or outdoor structures designed for the maximum output of beef cattle, dairy cows, hogs, and poultry are the 4 that are used. How do antibiotics and waste disposal fit into this? Well, antibiotics are needed to be used very heavily to help reduce disease, and it leads to antibiotic-resistant strains of microorganisms. Excess waste can be used to fertilize nearby farmlands, but a lot of times it causes over-fertilization, and the biggest problem is that this waste contaminates water. When you have this much waste, it's going to run off into your local water system. Sustainable animal farming. This is like what we opened up with Joel Salatin. Advantages, it's less of a moral issue. Rather than having these animals all crammed in and poor conditions, people approve of animals getting to live the way they were designed to live, even if they are going to be slaughtered at the end. Manure is evenly spread, so we don't have that big pile of waste. We have reduced disease, so we need less antibiotics. Fewer fossil fuels are used to maintain these animals. Disadvantages, it costs much more per animal, and they take up more space. They're using more land than they would otherwise. If we look at the harvesting of fish and shellfish, a fishery is a commercially harvestable population of fish within a particular ecological region. This is where the tragedy of the commons is occurring. We don't have fish move. They go places. Countries don't own fish. So you try to regulate them. You have to regulate them globally as opposed to nationally. Fishery collapse is decline of a fish population by 90% or more. It has to get pretty low in order to establish fishery collapse. And harvesting methods, boats stay out at sea for a long period of time. There's sonar and spotter planes, large drag nets, hooks or large nets, things like that. We are much more able to find our fish than we were before. If we have sustainable fishery management plans, they work with other countries' plans as well. Important since fish migrate, like I mentioned. It may include ITQs, individual transferable quotas, which is the total allowable catch determined by fishery management. They sort of determine how much you can catch and allow you a quota. You can either catch your quota and be done, or if you don't catch your quota, you can sell your quota to other fishing companies. Aquaculture is this idea of farming of aquatic organisms such as fish, shellfish, and seaweeds. You are constructing an aquatic ecosystem and stocking, feeding, protecting. All of our catfish and trout almost are aquaculture, and about half of our consumption of shrimp and salmon are from aquaculture. It can help alleviate the human-caused pressure and help us feed the undernourished. So if we're growing them and we're growing them to be raised, we think, well, this is perfect. This is a great solution. But you're letting clean water come into these arenas where these fish are being raised, and that dirty water, which is highly concentrated in food and feces and antibiotics, very similar to our waste from feedlots of land animals, comes out. And so now we're sending out this bacteria and viruses that are spreading to the natives. Also, if we're growing specific types of fish and they interbreed with native fish, that might not work out so well. And marine aquaculture is inundated with a lot of environmental risks. So we're looking at predators, we're looking at being used for fish meal, we're looking at the introduction of non-native species, we're looking at drugs that are ending up in the water, we're looking at herbicides that end up there, fish mortality, and then we're looking at all the different ways we have genetically modified organisms and they're escaping, new diseases and new parasites, incubation of local diseases. So when things are all, together, we have more disease. So while it might seem like a great solution, it also comes with the same sort of problems that concentrating any group of animals together would be. So very similar to feedlots.